estate industry in Texas. Meetings focus on promoting the interests of real estate professionals and consumers, fostering competition and sharing best practices. Discussions that violate antitrust laws such as fixed pricing or limiting service offerings are strictly prohibited. So thank you for everyone coming. I know there's a lot of changes coming up. We're going to go over some of those changes today, ask any of your questions, and go over some new stuff that we have going on that's coming up. So first up is Beckie Whittier with Central Texas MLS. She will go over the NAR settlement update and Central Texas MLS changes.
So we tried to make this as easy for you as possible because I know it seems overwhelming, but I think you'll see this is going to be all that. So the first thing that we're doing is we are eliminating all the compensation fields from the MLS. And that should be effective August 7th. That's what CoreLogic has told us so far. And today we are notifying all of your vendors that have your data feeds going to your websites. They're being notified today of what's taking place so none of your feeds break. So they've got a week to get ready for this.
So for screenshots.
So adding the ability for your sellers to market their properties and giving them concessions that they want to offer a buyer that can be put into an offer. Here are the fields that we are adding. And none of these fields are mandatory because your seller doesn't have to offer if they don't want to.
So this is the way the input form is currently.
And those will be going away.
And those are going to be replaced.
Except for the first one. And that was mine.
So that's the way it currently is set up. If you like, we can send these slides out afterwards too.
So here, you can say yes or no. And if it's yes, you are letting the buyer's agent know that the seller may consider a concession included in an offer. So there's no set price. It's just letting them know that they'll consider it. And then if your seller wants to offer $10,000, you put 10,000 here and you'll put a dollar sign there. Now, a lot of our builders offer percentages. And so for the builders especially, they can put, whether it's 4%, whatever, 5%, whatever they're offering, and then they will have the percentage there, but none of them are mandatory. You don't, and they don't have to offer anything if they don't want to. Does that make sense? Does that sound easier?
And then we have the display. So these are already, I just talked to CoreLogic this morning. It says concess. I want them to change it to concession in price, but those are automatically going to display right here. So underneath the legal description section, when you get down into here, commission, they'll display on all the displays. And Tracy Norris was asking, don't forget about the leasing side. This is going to go across all property types. So, yeah.
So what we're working on right now is they have mandatory that you have to have a buyer's rep agreement in place before you show. So it's very difficult for us as an MLS to monitor that, obviously. So one of the things we're doing is we're working with showing time. This probably won't be ready by the 7th because we're still working on it.
So in showing time, you're going to do a search for your property. That's not going to change that part of it. When you get your results, comes up like this. Whoop, not like that. Okay. And then you've got a button on here. You can click the button, right, for the buyer showing.
When you press that button,
then this next screen will pop up.
something like it.
Yeah.
Where you will be saying, yes, you agree and confirm that you have that in place prior to showing. We're probably going to change some of the verbiage, but it'll be something like that. If you say no, you will be taken out of this and sent back to search and unable to set up a showing.
It actually makes your search results like this previous screen that we were looking at. Where you had your search results, that's all black or all white, like blank. So you can't, like, once you hit no, you can't even schedule anything on there. Yeah, you'd have to go out and come back into it to do it. If you click yes, then it forwards you to the regular screen you're used to seeing, which is gonna be this guy right here. And then you can go ahead and schedule a show. So you actually have to acknowledge it. For us, we thought it made more sense to handle that, facilitate that through showing time. Like Becky said, it's not gonna fix every situation, but since we're supposed to be scheduling our showings through showing time anyway, that's where it made sense to do it, as opposed to trying to track it in the MLS.
I kind of see this like the CCP, the clear cooperation policy. Really, the only way that we can enforce it is if it's agent identified and turned in. So lots of people don't even go through showing time, so there's no way for us to track that. They'll just do a combo and go on. So this is the best way that we know to accommodate that, but it's not an all answer. So any questions about those changes coming? We tried to make it as easy as possible for you.
The concession amount can be $1 or a percent.
Yes, either or.
Candy has a question. Candy, I'm gonna put you up on the screen over on the other side here, if I can. make
Oh,
you see.
good. You're gonna put me out in the middle. Now, when we're talking about this, and I hate to do this to you guys, but this is for all of CTX MLS, correct?
Correct.
Okay, okay. Just because I happen to be one of the other ones. So, all right, we just gotta identify that it's our MLS system.
Yes, it includes you, Candy.
And all the other people. All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
So when we mark yes, we can assume that they have, but I'm not downloaded or approved.
No. No, I'm putting agents at their word.
Oh, no.
But I don't know how else to do it. And the way I look at it, it's like the listing agreement. When you come into the MLS, you agree that in order to put in a listing, you have a listing agreement. But I don't go out and say, I want to see your listing agreement, although there's some that I am now, but. Yeah.
And then on the concessions, so.
Here's another. I know you do, but people on Zoom can't hear you others.
So on the concessions, is that going to include the compensation for the buyer's agent and closing costs, or is it just for the compensation?
It is the concession that the seller is offering to the buyer. How the buyer wants to use it will be up to the buyer.
So it's,
Is that made public information? Is that concession made public to the feed, like to Voter.com?
We are sending those fields out through the data feeds,
Okay.
or will be.
The commission, yes or no?
No, there's no commission.
Right.
It's-
You had a field that said commission, yes or no.
That was the old field.
With all the
Now it's
concessions.
concessions.
Those are only concession. Commission fields are totally out.
I got it.
And everything that is being transferred information wise is only between the seller and the buyer. The listing agent and the buyer agent are not involved.
So that's 11F in our listing representation contract. That new 11F, specifically that. Right? That.
You need to talk to your broker about that. We have no commission in the MLS.
Okay.
So commission investors, this is.
Yes.
The buyer and the seller.
Yep.
You had a question?
Yeah, on that field, do you know if it's going to be, do you have to enter a percentage for $1 now, or could you put like a TP?
No. If your seller doesn't know, but they are open to something, I would not check either one of those fields, and I would just check yes, that your seller is open.
Okay.
And then it's up to the buyer to put it into their offer.
Since everything in the contract is a safe way to do this, we would simply need to check yes, don't put anything in any of the other fields and have the conversation. And use the contracts. You have a contract with your seller, you have a contract with your buyer, and your store.
Well, and there are sellers that will come out and say, I'm offering $4,500 for closing costs.
I've got a question online right quick.
Yeah, Beckie, go ahead.
Okay, so typically in a drop down like that, concessions, yes or no, or any other area, if you say no, then you don't have to fill anything else out. But typically, if you say yes, then that will require you to fill the rest of the information out. So you're telling me that if me or one of my agents check yes, they do not necessarily have to fill out the rest of the information, don't have to put the concession amount or type, but they can say yes and leave it vague like that?
Well, it's not vague. If your seller has an exact amount they're willing to offer, then you fill in the other. But if your seller is just open to something that the buyer might put into an offer, then your seller wants to communicate that as a part of marketing their property. So it would
I
just,
understand that, but if you follow me here, typically when you answer a drop down with a yes response, you're required to fill in the rest of the fields with some type of information. So you're saying that we could indeed say yes on the concessions drop down, but not be required to fill in the rest of the information?
that's correct.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? All right, next we have Texas Realtors MLS updates with David Jones. He's Texas Realtors legal counsel. So thank you for being with us today.
David, give me 1 second.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invite. My name is David Jones, Deputy General Counsel here with Texas Realtors, part of the legal team. So I have up here on the screen a couple of the rules from the NAR settlement. Beckie and Mike just did a great job talking about the rules that affect compensation, coming off of the MLS and the concession fields. So I'm really going to kind of just stick to the contract changes.
David, did you?
Okay, so the two basic rule changes that affect contracts are required to have two disclosures in our agreements. One is that broker compensation is not set by law and is fully negotiable. And the other one deals with the seller. You have to make sure you disclose to the seller if there's going to be an offer of compensation, either from the seller or the listing broker over to the buyer side. And you got to get the seller's authorization to be able to do that. We have incorporated all of those in the Texas Realtors listing agreements, buyer rep agreements. I have some screenshots that I'll go through quickly. Keep in mind, I'll keep this kind of at a high level. We can talk about these things for like 3-4 hours. So I'll just do the kind of the 10,000-foot level today. Written buyer agreement requirement. You must have a written agreement when working with the buyer before touring a home. Working with the buyer basically means you're providing broker services to the buyer. You're representing the buyer's interests. So negotiating property, negotiating offers, identifying property, all of that stuff. The listing agent is not required to sign to get written buyer agreements to show the home, because you are not working with the buyer. You are representing the seller as you're doing that. Now, if you're at an open house and you're the listing broker, if a buyer comes in, and obviously if that conversation starts to change and that buyer wants you to represent them, then yes, you would need to go ahead and get a written agreement with them at that time. But just to, show the property, listing brokers are not required to get the written agreement at your open house. That would apply to all the other agents and broker associates in the firm as well. You're all initially, you are representing the interests of the seller. But again, if that conversation turns to representing the buyer, then you need to talk about a buyer representation agreement. Touring a home, that means showing. We just use NAR talks on a national level. They use different language in different parts of the country. For us here in Texas, touring means showing the property, buyer or their agent physically entering the property. Home means 1 to 4 family residential property, so it does not apply to commercial. We're talking about buyer here, so it does not apply to leasing, does not apply to vacant land. Okay, I'm going to skip a few slides and get to the forms. So basically, here's what we did. Again, that 10,000 foot view is that, here's kind of the change. We've got these NAR mandated changes. Before, compensation was primarily done one way. We had a very efficient way to do compensation through the MLS, where the seller paid the listing broker put a number in the MLS, and that was the primary, easy, efficient way to handle it. Well, all that's gone now. And so now all the other ways that broker compensation could be handled, they're now on the table. Okay. So these other ways that compensation could have been handled, they were always there. They just were not utilized. So now it's all about consumer choice. So we need to put all the other options on the table, shine a spotlight on them, have those conversations with sellers and with buyers, and talk about the various ways that broker compensation can be handled. And that's what Texas Realtors has done with the forms. Okay, we wanted to make sure that the various choices that sellers and buyers have and that brokerages have to structure broker compensation are available within the form. So that's sort of the reasoning behind all of these changes to our forms, not just to comply with the rules from the NAR settlement that obviously was done, but also the bigger picture. It's about consumer choice, and it's about transparency, letting sellers and buyers see what the compensation is and be able to, almost choose. It's like a fork in the road. So the first one I will start is this one. This is the broker compensation paragraph in the listing agreement. Okay, and you see that, we separated out the two choices. So like this is the beginning of the transaction. An owner decides to sell, they hire a listing broker. How do you want to pay broker compensation? You can pay the traditional way. 5A is the seller pays the listing broker, and then the listing broker will take some of that and then share it with the buyer's broker, if there is a buyer's broker. We've created a separate paragraph. Paragraph B is if the seller says, no, I only want to pay my broker, you, the listing broker, and I will I will consider paying the buyer side later on when offers start to come in. So we separated them out so that it is a clear choice for sellers that that is not just one way to do it. Kind of piggybacking off that conversation I heard with Beckie and Mike about the concession fields. If the seller wants to go through 5B, so they're only going to pay their broker, the listing broker. Well, the next conversation is, that if that's your choice, that's the way we can do it. But there's a good chance that buyers, when they start submitting offers, they're going to ask for concessions, contributions, buyer expenses, pay my buyer broker fees. That's a conversation that's going to come if there is no listing broker offer of compensation. And so we put that note down there at the bottom, right underneath 5B, that basically says that. It's basically like a heads up to the seller. Hey, keep in mind, buyers are probably going to ask you to pay something for their expenses. If the seller is willing to contribute money to buyer's expenses, we wanted to make sure that the listing broker had authorization to do that. Okay, so paragraph 11 is actually where the broker's authority to do things is. So this paragraph 5 is just compensation. So we didn't want to mix it up and put it there. But we directed your attention down to paragraph 11F. That's where broker's authority is. So it's a simple checkbox. You can see it down there at the very bottom of the screen. Seller does or does not authorize broker to share this information. Okay, so that's the authority that you're going to get if you're going to go on the MLS and click yes, just a simple, the yes or no, click yes, that the seller is open to offering concession. It does not include an amount here. There's no blank line here. But checking authorization is what you want to make sure you get, so you know that the seller is okay with you sharing that information. And I do want to point out, it's not necessarily that clear here, but the compensation from the listing broker, 5A. So if you're doing it the traditional way that the seller pays the listing broker and listing broker offers compensation, you already have authorization to advertise that. So you don't need to check 11F for that. Okay. That's already worked into the agreement. You only need the seller's authorization for 11F if you're going to authorize that the seller is open to offering concessions. Okay. So your listing broker offer of compensation, you're good, you can advertise it. So now let's say in your MLS, you do have a field where you can actually put in a number that seller is wants known and shared to the buyers out there. Well, we have a separate form for that. And we put that on a separate form because not all MLSs are going to have that field. Some MLSs are just going to have a yes, no. Some are not going to have anything at all. So you're working with an MLS that does have a spot to put a specific number. We have this separate authorization. It's form 1412. Where it does, paragraph A has a specific number that you can put in the MLS. Now, if the seller is saying, I don't want a specific number, but I do want you to just generally say, yeah, seller's open to seller concessions, you can just check yes on 11F and then you're done. But if the seller goes a step further and says, I want you to share that I'm open, not only that, I want you to put in a specific amount, then you would pull out this one to get that authorization for the specific amount. So basically this paragraph, we wanted it to help listing brokers have that conversation with your buyer. So it almost acts like a blueprint of that conversation. It's like first you got 5A and 5B, and you can have that conversation. And then if they're choosing 5B, it's like, okay, well, next we got to talk about, do you want me to tell people you're open to seller concessions? Yes or no? Okay, yes. Now the next conversation is, do you want me to tell people about a specific amount? Okay, let me pull out this 1412. Okay. I'm going to skip forward on some of these. Okay, compensation on the buyer side now. The buyer side has a few more restrictions from the NAR settlement. One, it has the objectively ascertainable requirement. So any compensation has to be in the agreement. It has to be objectively ascertainable, which basically means it has to be like a definite specific amount. So you can't put like a range. My compensation will be from, X to Y. No, you have to figure out a specific either amount or a rate, like a percentage. And so we had to make some adjustments. We took away some of the blank lines in there. We felt that having blank lines for members to just write whatever is probably a good way to get people in trouble. And by not putting in something that's objectively ascertainable. So you have, percentage, you have a flat fee. It is a buyer or tenant representation agreement. So you have leases as well. It still has in it the provision that says that you are first going to try to get this compensation from the seller or the listing broker, and then anything left over is from the buyer. So that hasn't changed. It still works that way. The big question we get asked about is bonuses. Can we get a bonus? Yes, you are entitled to get a bonus, but your buyer has to authorize that. Your buyer has to agree to that. And it has to be specific and it has to be definite, right? Objectively ascertainable. So you can't just say I'm allowed to retain any bonuses if they come, because you have to put a number in there. So really the only way that we could still have a provision for bonuses was to put it on the amendment. We couldn't put it in the buyer rep agreement initially because you have no idea what property your buyer is going to buy at that point. You don't know if there's a bonus. You don't know how much it is. So in the amendment, and I'll show you later, we added in a provision for bonuses where you could put in the specific amount. Okay. Obviously, you're probably going to want to have that conversation with your buyer at the beginning and kind of prep them. So when they do want to buy a property with a bonus, you've already had that conversation and you're going to dazzle them with all your brilliance and your charm, and they're just going to want to say, yes, you've earned that bonus. But that's the direction we're going to with buyer agent compensation. Is the buyer needs to know exactly how much it is, and they need to be able to sign off on it and say, yes, this is what I'm going to pay. Okay, the short form, this is brand new. This form, the buyer tenant rep agreement short form, was a result of overwhelming member request. I can tell you it's in addition to the long form, our normal buyer rep agreement, 5 pages long. It's a great document. It's not going away. Okay, you can choose which document, which contract works for you. This document has paragraph 5, and this is a kind of a new concept. And this came from the requirement that to show the property, show a home, you have to have a written agreement with the buyer. And so paragraph 5 offers full services. That's normal. That's helping the buyer find the property all the way to sitting at the closing table with them. Or you can do showing services. Okay. It starts off saying paragraphs 5, 6, 7, and 8 don't apply. That's the rest of the contract. So if you check showing services, the contract stops at paragraph 5. So it's a 5-paragraph agreement at that point. It turns it into, basically 2 contracts in one. You could do it for full services, or you can use it just to get in the door with the buyer. Particularly helpful for the buyers who are reluctant to immediately sign some 5-page agreement when you just met them 5 minutes ago, right? We did include a line for a flat fee for showing services. It's a new thing for us, and so we went really basic with it. For now, it's a flat fee. Some might want a more complex fee, like a fee for each property that they show. You can attach an addendum or a fee schedule or something like that has more complex fees in it. Talk to an attorney to draft something up for you with that. But for now, this form, we're keeping it simple. We're keeping it basic. One of the ways, the brokers on our task force thought of this form and how it could be used is one of them described it as, well, instead of getting married, it's like a first date, right? You need something to get into the property. The buyer's not sure, they're not ready to jump into a long-term exclusive representation agreement, but you still need to do something. So you can use this agreement with showing services, and you can put 0 as the fee. It's still a binding contract if you don't want to charge. Under paragraph 3, you have the definition of market area. It can be as small as 1 property address. Okay. The term, how long does it last? It could be 1 day. It can begin and end on the same day. And then you can put 0 as your fee. Okay, so that's how much flexibility is worked into this agreement. So that will get you in the door, and basically the buyer has like no further commitments. And then that provides you with the opportunity to introduce yourself, to begin that relationship, to begin that trust that buyer would want before they sign some long term. And so after you make that introduction, you have that relationship. And if that buyer then says, you know what, I do like you, I want to submit an offer on this property and use you. Fantastic. Let's sit down and let's talk about the contract. And so now you can amend this to full services and you can include a fee if you need to. Or after you've built up that trust, maybe now they will be willing to sign the 5-page long form agreement. Okay. So, there are some brokers who have looked at the short form, they understand why it's needed, but they don't really care for it. You can fit more legal stuff, that learn that term in law school, legal stuff, in a 5-page agreement than you can in 1 page. So it doesn't have as much stuff. Okay. So if you really like the 5-page agreement, that's fantastic. Use that one. But again, if you have a hesitant buyer, that's going to be hard to get them to sign a 5-page agreement right at the beginning just to open the door. But you can use showing services for that initial meeting, and then when they're ready to sign something long term, then you can switch over to the long form 5-page agreement. Okay, so that's sort of how the brokers envision this working. And again, it's all about putting all of these options on the table. Consumer choice for our members, being transparent as we possibly can. Here, let me show you. This is the amendment. So we added a couple paragraphs for changing of compensation. The buyer, the NAR settlement does have that requirement that the buyer's broker cannot get paid more than what's in the buyer agreement, right? We always get asked, well, can we amend it later? Yes, you can amend it later. Okay, keep in mind, an amendment, the buyer would have to agree to sign it for, if you want to raise the compensation. If you find out there's more compensation available from the seller or from the listing broker, you can amend it later. And so you can use the amendment for a representation agreement. All right, compensation agreement between brokers, 2402. This is probably going to be the workhorse of Texas Realtors forms going forward. Since compensation is off the MLS, what a lot of agents didn't realize is that when you put compensation on the MLS, that created a legally binding contract between the listing broker and buyer's broker. Even though you didn't have to sign something separate, that was legally binding contract. You could go to court with that. That's gone. So now we need something to replace the legally binding contract between brokers for the listing broker to pay compensation to the buyer's broker, the cooperating broker. And this is the form that does that. So 2402, we simplified it down to 1 page. Okay. We inserted the procuring cause standard. So the cooperating broker has to be the procuring cause of that transaction to be entitled to it. So we incorporated that standard. So going forward, once you execute this, it's basically the same standards you've been used to all these years. It's just not through the MLS anymore. You actually have to sign a piece of paper that creates that legally binding agreement from the listing broker to the cooperating broker. Okay, let me hit one more. This is the addendum regarding brokers' fees. This is 2406. This is another new one. This one actually is attached to the sales contract. So you would attach this to the 1-to-4 contract. The rest of them, like the compensation agreement, that is between listing broker and cooperating broker, right? Broker to broker. This one is actually signed by the seller, and the buyer becomes part of the contract itself. So it's unique in that way. This one, it has several, it refers to the other agreements, like it refers to the listing agreement, what the seller is going to pay the listing broker. It does not include an amount because those amounts are, you don't have to share those amounts. This one deals with, is there compensation coming from the listing broker seller side over to the buyer side? So it refers to those other agreements and that the listing broker is going to get paid under the terms of those. We get asked, well, how is the title company going to know those amounts the same way they know now, with a CDA, with your commission disbursement authorization. So you send those out with those amounts, so you don't have to put those amounts in this document. Paragraph D deals with the other broker. It's called other broker because that's the way it's described in the contracts. So that would be the buyer's broker. D1 is the traditional way. The listing broker agrees to pay a fee to the other broker, to the buyer's broker. That's D1. D2 deals with if the seller is now going to pay. So it's not going through the listing broker, the seller's paying the buyer's broker directly. You got two ways to do that. We do have an agreement, just like the commission agreement between brokers. We have another one called the commission agreement between broker and owner. So that can be a direct agreement between the seller and the buyer's broker. That is, it's one of the options. Remember, all options are now on the table, so we're not recommending one over the other, but it's an option to consider. That last one, D2B, that is still the seller paying the buyer's broker, but they're going to do it through the sales contract. So that one actually adds a term to the 1-to-4 contract. That's not currently in there. And that's the only one of those boxes there that creates something new. All the rest of them, if you notice, they refer to an outside an agreement. So this form doesn't change those outside agreements. It just gives the title company notice that there is an outside agreement where we have agreed for compensation and we are instructing the title company to pay in accordance with these outside agreements. But that bottom one is brand new. When that one is executed, the seller and the buyer are agreeing to compensation right here, right now. Okay. Everything else is just like a notice. So that creates a brand new obligation for the seller. The kind of the final point before I'll let Candy talk. So the final point is this. People ask about, well, what's the difference between like paragraph 12 in the sales contract? That is where that is kind of the traditional seller concession field where the seller is agreeing to pay amount towards buyer's expenses in the contract. Buyer's expenses is a defined term. It's got a paragraph that all the stuff that is included in buyer's expenses. And it talks about loan origination and appraisal and some other stuff. And at the bottom, it says, and any other costs payable by buyer under the contract. Okay. That paragraph 12 does not include broker's fees. Okay. Nowhere in there does it say broker's fees. Broker's fees are not part of the contract. So we needed something different where the seller can agree to directly pay money to the buyer's broker, not just general expenses. And so in this addendum, that's where we have that. It's the last line, D2B is what does that. So is it possible to put money in both? Yeah. It's still the seller paying, but that money is going to different places now. So if you put something in paragraph 12 in the contract, that money goes towards buyer's expenses. If you put money here in this form, that money is going directly to the buyer's broker. Okay. I'm probably over time. I wasn't watching, but I'll stop there.
Does anyone have any questions?
You can have all my time.
I'm sorry.
It's hard to hear from the audience, so I may need like a microphone or somebody to repeat.
I understand that a lot of these forms are not actually going to be available until November, but that these laws go into effect August 17th. So what do we do in the meantime?
Yeah, the rule changes come at no later than August 17th. MLS is they can, and some of them already have, agreed to implement them for that date. Once your MLS has updated, their rules, that's when you need to comply with the rules. The thing about the November date, it gets kind of technical, legally speaking, but the plaintiffs in the antitrust lawsuit have released everybody, all of us, even individually, everybody in that room. So it's not just NAR, it's not just Texas Realtors. Everybody is released from liability, so nobody else can sue us. But their release of liability is limited, and it only goes up to August 17th. So if you haven't changed your policies and procedures past August 17th, even though we haven't got final approval yet, if you haven't changed, now you're opening yourself up for somebody else to start suing you again. So that's why everybody's got to implement the policies by August 17th, and we're not waiting until the November date for final approval.
Asking about the forms. Are their forms not going to be ready until November? Or is it just the contract that won't be ready until November? Because it's a Trek form.
The Trek forms. Okay. Okay. I didn't understand the question. Sorry about that. The Texas Realtors forms are already out. Okay. They've been out since June 24th. And that is one of the reasons that last form, the addendum regarding broker fees, that is why we created that one. Trek is currently working on their forms to possibly make these changes to deal with broker compensation in like the 1 to 4 and unimproved and all that. They move a lot slower than Texas Realtors can. So they've got meetings and notices, and if they make a change, we're looking probably January before they could put something out that deals with this. That is why we put out the addendum regarding brokers fees 2406. That was that last one, where if the parties wanted to deal with compensation where the seller pays the buyer's broker in the contract, that's the one you use. Right now, that's the only one that has that option available, if that's the way that compensation is going to be handled by the seller directly to the buyer's broker. So that is available, but right now only on the Texas Realtors form. If and when Trek does finally approve some change and they update their contracts to do the same thing, then we're going to have to update our form. So we'll kind of have to wait and see what they ultimately end up doing. But for right now, it is available to add seller paying buyer's brokers fees in the contract, but only with the Texas Realtors addendum.
Okay, one more question. Oh.
David, will you release a copy or send a copy of your slides of your presentation?
Yeah. And it's not going to help you. It's just pictures of the contracts. Yeah, you have to listen to all of my wonderful words. But yes, I will send you, I'll send a copy of the slides. And by keep in mind, this is, this slide presentation, we use this for a lot of different slides. So it's got a lot more slides in it than I showed. This was just kind of the quick overview.
Does anyone else have a question? Okay, I think we're good. Thank you so much, David. Oh.
This is being recorded and will be loaded into the broker manager's toolkit.
Okay, this is being recorded and will be uploaded in the manager broker toolkit if anyone wants to go back and use his presentation just to see what he said. And now we have Candy with us. Welcome, Miss Candy Cooke.
Hi, everybody. How are you guys? Everybody good?
Marvelous, darling.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Oh, David, are you going to sit in here while I talk?
Yep, I'm recording it too. Get my phone out.
All right. Good afternoon or good morning. It's still morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm Candy Cooke. I'm one of the senior instructors. I'm a broker. I'm an appraiser. I am part of the leadership team on one of your partners in CTX MLS. I'm at Williamson County now. I have, in fact, they just gave me the numbers. Since June, I've had something like 1,800 students in contracts. David is sick of talking to me. I'm just going to say it. David has had to have me pestering him. And all of these changes that have come forward, it's been really interesting to watch. I will tell you that I've probably had, I don't know, probably had 25, 30 classes that I've taught on all of this. I will tell you sometimes our appraisers get frustrated with me. And David started to address it. He was talking about that difference between Trek and TR. And I actually had John George, the vice chair of Broker Lawyer Committee. You can go on to Trek and you can see what their proposed changes are. but watch me with my finger because he didn't sound real positive. It's got to go to the commission in August. Commission decides whether the changes are good, then if they say okay, then it goes back out and goes for public comment. And then they look at the comments and then they come back and they put it to the commission again in November. And if the commission agrees to it, we don't know when they're going to say, whether they're going to say January. But in the meantime, if the commission actually says no, it goes back, and it could be February or further to get all of these paperwork, all of these things to match together. I'm hoping everybody who's in here has taken a class. I still have some people who haven't taken classes that I know of. This is pretty scary to get it going. And the thing is it's going to affect the brokers and the appraisers. I'm going to just tell you this right now. And I actually bounced it off of David yesterday to make sure that what I was saying sounded correct. Okay. So for my 37 years of being licensed in Texas, I think that's what the number is. We've always had it, and I hate to put the always name in there, but we've had the seller's side compensating the brokers. I remember when we went to buyer representation, we didn't even, prior to that, we worked as sub-agents. But it's been something that in our brain, we could say, this is the way things go. Well, now that we're moving the commission around, compensation around, we may be moving it from the listing side, the sales side, to the buy side. Okay. And one of my things that I say, and everybody's got to get their heads around this, is that if I'm the buyer and I go in and they say, no, we're not going to compensate your agent, and I've signed the 15-1 or the 1507 is saying I'm going to pay it. If nobody else pays it, then I certainly am not going to give the seller that extra money that used to go towards the buyer's compensation. And I'm going to keep that on the buy side. It's going to move some numbers back and forth. And here's the problem. You guys don't have anything in MLS, in our CTX MLS is not going to disclose where that money is coming from and where it's going to. Okay. So I have an example, and I give this example. It was $100,000 property. The seller, who was the bank, said we're not paying compensation. I was the agent. My buyer, who was very knowledgeable and very mathematically minded, said, okay, how much do you think? And we talked back and forth, and 100,000. And he goes, okay, we're going to offer 97. Okay. Because, and when he actually asked to be there when we presented the offer, okay, this was a nightmare. And when the banker said, well, I thought we'd get more money, my client turned around and said, well, if you'd pay her, we'd give you more money, but we're not giving you money and then paying her and raising the actual cost of this house. Guys, you're going to have to help the appraisers understand who's paying this money, because 3% can, and I did say 3%, it can bust your deal. If we're moving the compensation from one side to the other. I was told the other day that the lenders are now supposed to do the net sheet for the buyers, including the cost of compensation. Every single one. When they're qualifying somebody, they're supposed to have the compensation on the buy side at this point. I haven't been able to confirm that. I've got a couple other senior instructors who've been doing that work, but they're telling us that we're going to move that money around. So for years, we've had set things in our brains about how we're going to total up things. And now you're gonna have to talk to each other, and everybody says, oh, well, that's just the appraisers. Hello, you have to do a CMA. According to TRET 535.16C says you have to do a CMA when negotiating a listing, CMA or BPO. So what are you going to do if you have that $97,000 sale in there and you're comparing it to other ones where the sellers paid the commission and the sales price stayed high? We're going to have to, oh, wait, we're going to have to talk to each other. We're actually going to have conversations. You're going to have to tell the truth, or we're going to have a real problem going forward. And we're going to have some of the agents who don't know how to do CMAs, and they're putting these CMAs out there and they haven't done their research. It's going to take us actually talking to each other. First off, the buyer's agent has to talk to the listing agent about whether they're compensating. And then we keep going further and further. And as we've said, paragraph 12A1B only has one blank right now. We're hearing there's supposed to be 2 blanks. John George said that's what they were proposing, but it's going to take us months to get to that point. Okay? And we're not supposed to be putting compensation even in our sold data on MLS. So how are you guys going to get this information back and forth? Okay? Questions? Anybody? Or did I just boggle everybody? I love it. Natalie's sitting here trying to say, I'm not going to bother Candy. I'm not going to ask a question. I'm not going to do this. Sue Norris is sitting. Who has a question on this?
I think now we got a couple.
Okay.
Hey, Candy, we just heard that we could put seller concessions in the MLS. So that seller says, hey, I'm going to pay this amount. So when the transaction closes, you could still put that in. If we put it in the front side, you could, at the end, you would think you could put it in. And at least we know, hey, there's some compensation. We may not know exactly what it was, but we know the seller paid something extra that came out of that sales price, right?
Is everybody going to put the concessions in there correctly? Did I did say that out loud. I did. Are you, when you do concessions and the buy side's paying stuff, are you going to put in the compensation was in there? Because I don't think we have a rule that says that. So yeah, you're telling me there's some concessions, but we have concessions, we have compensation concessions, and we have closing cost concessions. And that blank is not going to let us split those out. Agreed?
Hey, good morning, Candy.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I've got a question that kind of goes back towards Beckie's comment about scheduling appointments. Let's say I've got a mother's brother's cousin's sister that wants to go see a house and it's the first time meeting them. And I'm scheduling it through showing time, but I don't have, I haven't even, all I've done is talk to them on the phone and they want to go look at this house. But showing time's asking me if I have a list, buyer's agreement on them. Obviously I don't until I meet with them at the house. So.
That's not loser, that's lawsuit.
Right, but in order to schedule said showing, I have to, it's asking me if I have this documentation in place.
We
I can't
have
hear 100
the
people.
agreement, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, but the agreement says prior to showing, we must have a buyer's representation agreement in place.
Correct. So how do I go about scheduling their first showing, for example?
You would think that's what the short form is essentially designed for, right? You use the short form You
No, I
put it
understand
in
that, but
for
what
the
I'm saying
day
is
and
that
for the date and just use it for that one example and charge a 0 fee, and that's the easy way to do it, no?
I'm talking
Yeah.
about scheduling is what I'm doing. So I want to schedule a showing and I'm going to meet with them.
You
Okay.
gotta, you
Right,
gotta
I mean-
have a conversation beforehand, first substantive dialogue.
So I can't, what you're telling me is that I can't have them sign it before I schedule it.
You have to have an agreement beforehand. David, don't leave me out here hanging.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's a difference between like the NAR policy and what, you know, the showing sort of like what they've set up. The NAR policy only requires it before you show the property. You know, so you could, you know, you can carry around a paper, you know, one short form with you and sign it, you know, on the trunk of your car if you want to, right outside the property. That would satisfy NAR's requirement. Now, you know, you're going to have to talk to this showing service regarding their policies and maybe talk to them about that possibility that, hey, I might sign it when I get there. If they've considered that, if they've said, you know what, you know, we're going to go with the policy that we want you to get it executed before you even schedule it through us, you know, that's their policy.
But David, Candy, am I mean,
from the MLS.
can you hear me? Does that make sense?
From the
if
MLS,
we-
yeah, we can hear you. From the MLS side of things, we're not able to police it. So, I mean, if they select yes, schedule a showing and then get it signed in the trunk. I don't know. Becky, you got a comment on that?
Here, I mean, there you go.
My thought process on that is because I'm looking forward ahead and we have syndicators out there right now that are offering to set up showings on their sites. And they're going to have to figure out how to get something signed. My feeling is we haven't finished the language, but my feeling is that it should say something along the lines of, will you have it signed prior to showing? Not, is it signed now? Check yes. Will you have it signed before showing? Because there is those. I'm in Dallas, I'm driving down. Can you set up showings? That happens all the time. And we've got to make it easy for you to do your job. So that's why I said we're not done with the verbiage for showing time.
Yeah, that was just an example they gave us, but we can put whatever we want.
Yeah, and I would add, Mike, keep in mind these are NAR policies, and they made them part of MLS rules and regulations. And so there are some rules and regs that are mandatory, but MLS is having the discretion to supplement the NAR, you know, rules and regs. So yeah, this is something that MLSs across the state, across the country are going to be coming up with, you know, what is the direction, what additional kind of rules and regulations do they want to add on top of this? So you know, you're going to see some different ones. Like if you belong to different MLSs, there might be different MLS rules attached to all of these. And that's perfectly acceptable for each MLS and each MLS committee and board of directors to have these conversations and figure out which direction that they want to go.
From a risk reduction standpoint, as the agent, the best plan of action is to have a buyer's consultation before ever showing like them a house. I'm not gonna just pick up and go schedule a showing without meeting them first on Zoom or in person and having a consultation, going over everything and making sure then we can talk about and get that signed to then go set up showings. But that's going to be for every broker and agent. That's just from CYA for yourself.
Okay, you guys, so Zach just said it. And I've been teaching it. I think almost all of us are teaching it. we gotta quit fighting back against the buyer's rep, and we gotta get that buyer's rep signed. I call it floorboard paper, 1507. You can have one sitting on the floorboard, but you want to talk to somebody before we start into this, because you guys realize what it says about agent and sub-agent. We want, I'm telling you right now, I don't want anybody to be a sub-agent. I want you to be an agent. So you got to have that conversation with the IABS. You got to have that conversation with the buyer's rep. It can all be done. It can be done off my watch. I can be sending stuff and signing stuff and doing all of this. I think we're fighting back just because it's new. We've been saying, you know what? It's most of these rules have been here. We just didn't do them. And if you get your stuff in the right place and start working on it, and I know that people are busy, and I know you have lives and you have everything, take some classes. We're trying to get classes out there to give you guys as much information as we possibly can, and suggestions, and listen to other people talking, saying things.
Andy, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
And I knew you knew my brain was whirring whenever you were talking. Okay, on concessions. So we're lumping this number into on concessions on the sales contract. And then we have the 2406 if the seller decides that they're going to pay the buyers. What about the lender? They're looking at this number thinking it's a seller concession on their loan, and then the buyer's agent's going to be left if they don't pay attention to the money. I'm trying to figure out how that's all going.
I know you're hitting on one of the things that we've been questioning is what are the, okay, so we have the lenders. Let me throw another group in there. What about the title people? Okay, so lenders are sml.texas.gov. That's their regulators. Title company is TDI, Texas Department of Insurance. TREC has us. TALCB has the appraisers. We've got all of these regulators and all of these people in here. We just haven't gotten, I just really have the opinion that we don't have all of our ducks in a row yet. Okay. David's been working on it. I have no clue how many phone calls he's getting a day, because I know what I'm getting and I tell them to call him. No, I don't. No, I don't give out his phone number and I don't give out his email. But we're all trying to figure this out, and we're all trying to gather our thoughts on this. And he's very, very kind when he says this. But I said to David the other day, I said, so are we changing anything? And he goes, we're looking at some different things. He says, we haven't changed it yet because we don't even know what needs to be changed yet. That's the big thing. He says it calmly, and I start waving my hands and throwing my hands up. Okay. Yes, we need to talk to our lenders. We need to ask them, and we need to have that conversation about that compensation, and ask your lenders to always figure it on the buy side, just in case you get blindsided on something. Okay, I want you guys looking at this by setting expectations and having the knowledge and going out there and working on this. Sometimes we have to look at our clients and say, you know, I just don't know. Let me do some research on this. I don't know. Let me call some lenders and see what they're going to say. I'm going to tell you, if I say to you, let me ask the appraisers, they're going to burn me at the stake sometimes because they're so mad at me. We're trying to come up with an idea of how we're going to make all of these pieces fit together. Okay.
Natalie, great point. Thank you for that. Candy, we've got another question, I think, from CJ here in the audience.
Okay.
Candy or David. David, on one of your very first slides, I noticed that the word showing, touring also included virtual tours. Can you speak to that? Because we have the means to send all of these people listings on autopilot, and they're going to have virtual tours attached. So is it going to then want us to have that form signed
No.
prior to even sending that information?
No, they're talking about live virtual tours. So that is like if the agent is got their iPad out and the buyer is on the other end and you're walking around showing the property. That's what they're talking about. That you would need, that still qualifies. You would, as a showing, you'd have to get a written agreement. But no, the recorded, stuff.
All right. Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay. Another question coming up.
We're waiting for John. Actually wait for John. I've got one afterwards too.
I don't know. We don't have any mortgage consultants in here, but used to be is that FHA would only allow 6% to go towards seller concessions total. And now we're seeing concessions from the seller to include compensation, and that's going to cut in, especially on first-time home buyers. Does anybody know if this is going to play into that 6%? Because it didn't used to play into that number with the 6%. The seller concessions, or should I say the compensation, didn't play into the seller concessions.
I'm being told they're not going to, they're going to split it out. Even if it's on the contract that says one thing, they're going to get that number split out of it. And we've got the VA thing going on too.
Well, the VA, right. We all know the VA approved it as a out of contract type of, they're agreeable to it.
Yeah.
But
So,
FHA is not going to consider this as a 6% concession. Okay. Well, let me get your name and number, and if it does come up, I can cite you.
Hey, can I add something really quick? Keep in mind that like the difference between the concession and, broker fees, it gets weird because there are different rules for the MLS, what you can put on the MLS, what you can say on the MLS versus what you can do and say in the contract between the buyer and the seller. There's no compensation allowed on the MLS. So you can have concessions, but it cannot be like earmarked for compensation. So if you put a number in concession field on the MLS, you don't really know what that money is going to go towards. But then when the buyer and the seller actually fill out the offer and agree to the terms in the contract, you can put money. It's either going to go towards buyer's expenses in paragraph 12, or you can use the addendum for broker fees, and you can have money go specifically to the buyer's broker's fees. Okay, so in the contract, you're going to know. The problem is on the MLS, you're not going to know because you can't include money for compensation specifically. It has to stay generic. And so that's kind of what Candy was referring to. Like, you're going to have to talk and you're going to have conversations because the MLS is going to be generic concessions, but the contract can spell out specifically where the money goes.
David, I got one more comment too. So I'm going to ask the attorney a leading question. I know what my answer is, but at least one time a day, sometimes two, I'll get a call from somebody saying, you guys are removing compensation out of the MLS. And so I will just put it into a supplement and upload it into an attached document. Or there's other third-party websites out there. I'll just put it on that. How would you what would you recommend to everybody as far as best practices for doing such practice?
Yeah, no workarounds. Let's not be cute about the no compensation through the MLS. The Department of Justice is still very much interested in the real estate industry, and they have flat out said publicly that they are looking for workarounds, and they use the word workarounds, right? There's no compensation through the MLS. Any like other platform that is pulling MLS data cannot have compensation information, listed there. Brokers can still advertise offers of compensation. It just can't be through MLS or anything that's using MLS data. So you can put it on your, the signs. You can put it on, business cards. One thing, you can put it on your website is the big thing. As long as on your website, it only has compensation for your own listings. So you cannot aggregate other brokers' listings, but for your listings, you can put it on your website. You know, a broker had what I thought is a creative idea. You could have like a QR code on your sign, and that QR code, when someone pulls out their phone, it will lead them to their website. That's not required, but that's just one of the many creative ways that I have heard. And I think that's the next step, is to say, okay, it's not on the MLS. What are some other ways that I could do this? So you can, your typical marketing, tools, as long as they're not using MLS. So, like email blasts that you can use, postcards, newsletters, your website, you can advertise offers of compensation as long as it's not on the MLS. And you can't put on like a picture, you can't sit in the house with a poster with a big giant number 3 on it and then take a picture and then upload it you can't do any of that stuff. You can't upload like the compensation agreement with it already pre-filled in with numbers. You can't do any of that stuff. No workarounds. Let's not be cute about it. We know what the policies are. We know what the rules are. Let's get creative. You're all entrepreneurs. You're all, self-employed business owners. You have that spirit. You have that entrepreneurial creativity. Use it to come up with the next new marketing strategic plan. People are going to thrive under these new rules if you embrace them, understand them, and then come up with how am I going to attack this within the confines of the rules.
All great points. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank y'all so much. We appreciate y'all being with